You know, I think about my story and I think about who I am and how, as a Christian, we all kind of bounce around between Abraham's narrative. You know, and Abraham was called out of the land of Ur. It was a land of idolatry. It was a land where there were slaves to worshiping false gods and selfishness and to sin. And so when he was called out of that, he went to a place that was far better, and he started seeking God. And roughly around my 16th year is when I really got serious about figuring that out. And, you know, my mom and dad's here, and my grandparents are here, and all of them are very integral into who I became. My parents especially, because they gave me religious freedom. They told me to seek what is true, find out what is really real. And I did that. You know, I looked at a lot of different things, you know, all the monotheistic religions. I looked at even some of the crazy stuff, some of the pagan things. I looked at some of the Eastern religions like Buddhism. And yeah, I kind of shied away from Christianity all the way around. I know I went as a kid, but at the same time, there's lots of things that I saw that just weren't really congruent. One of which, I think about the idea of congruency. You know, congruency is this idea about, it's like train tracks, you know. When train tracks are congruent, the train just zips right down the line, right? But what happens when we have incongruent train tracks? You get a train wreck, right? That's the way it goes. So typically when I saw Christians, I saw hypocrites. And I saw people that were incongruent, and all they ever looked like to me were a train wreck. And I didn't want to be a train wreck. So I didn't even bother really, you know, entertaining that in any serious way. I mean, I was baptized when I was 10 or 11 at church camp and stuff, and I joined the club, so to say, but I never really grasped who God was. Well, my 16th year, I did this really crazy thing, you know, where I had done all that searching, and I was trying to figure out who I was supposed to be, and I remember praying with everything that I had, and I call it my cosmic prayer. You know, I just looked up to the heavens and I said, you know, whoever made me, whoever loved me, whoever cares for me, whoever makes all this stuff happen, whoever you are, make me a better person. That was my challenge to whomever he was, right? And so, wasn't 2 weeks later, I get kicked out of school for dealing a controlled substance on the school campus, and God completely owns me. It's the only way to really put it. Yeah, I remember going down, and there's a lot of shady things that happened in that time, but I knew I could lie and I could have got out of trouble. But for some reason, something came over me and I could not lie. I had to obey. I had to tell the truth. And it was really bizarre because I was like, wow, I'm going to do what's right. But then next thing I know, I'm kicked out of school for 365 days. And then I had to go to a private Christian school because it was the only opportunity for me to have any semblance of an education, right? And so while I'm there, you know, I encounter people who are just so loving and who genuinely follow Jesus. Now, they weren't perfect by any means, but they loved me. And there was lots of families that even though I was the rotten apple, they accepted me and they took me in. It changed my life completely. It really did. And then I found out, you know, all this time I'm reading scripture, learning more and more about who God is and who Yeshua, who Jesus is. And I get to this one point where I realize that it was their God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh, the Almighty God that created the universe, right? It was He who called me. It was He who answered me. And ever since that day, I've been sold for God ever since. I can't go to the left or to the right. I got to go exactly where He tells me to go. And every time I try to go to the left or the right, I fail miserably. Always, without a shadow of a doubt. So that really led me to this idea, and again, it's following along with Abraham's story, you know, seeking God and what that really looks like meant for me that I need to understand the words of God. I needed to be obedient. I needed to make disciples, follow the Great Commission, go out there and really live my life and be congruent. That led me to find Jess. I really felt passion that I needed to go to Bible college. I needed to learn the words of God. And so to do that, I felt like God was telling me I needed a wife. So I was 18 years old, you know, I went on a few mission trips and I got really connected, but I was seeking. I knew that I needed another. I needed a helper. I needed somebody to kind of go alongside me and do these things that God has told me to do. And so it's really kind of funny, you know. My grandmother was telling me about this really nice girl that started working at Bi-Lo's at about the same time that I started working at Bi-Lo's. You know, I was on the prowl, so I was looking for the cutest cashier I could find. You know, it's just what you did when you were working in the back, you know. And she happened to be it. She was absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. And so we ended up finding out that both our families were trying to kind of hook us up anyways. And I kind of played with that. And so I asked her for her number and I asked her to go on a date and everything. And I remember trying to call her, and she would tell me, "Oh no, I can't really talk right now. I've got way too much homework to do." And then I called back the next night, and I was, I just got my tonsils taken out. I'm all pukey and stuff. I don't really feel like talking tonight either. And it was really funny because I felt like God was really trying to push me in this direction. Like, it's one of 2 times in my life that I can honestly say that I feel like God was putting his hand on me and said, "Go against the flow. You need to pursue her." And so I did. And it was really incongruent for me to hear God tell me this, or feel that God was telling me this, and then have Jessica push back so hard. And I'm like, "God, what do you expect me to do? What do you want me to do? Where am I supposed to go? I'll give her one more chance, but if she doesn't bite, then I'm out. I'm going to go find a wife." And so I remember going up to the front line that day, and I was already discouraged. I barely even looked at her. And she looked at me and she said, "You going to call me tonight?" I said, "Well, I don't know. Not really been answering my phone calls yet." So I decided to go, and I called her. And that night we talked for 3-4 hours, something like that. And we've been separated maybe 1 to 2 days since. And that's been it. We started dating that October. Okay. By that January, we were engaged. And then that following September, we got married. So this was our 10-year anniversary this past September the 1st. Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, I thought it was 46 years, so it kind of tells you where my mind's at. But we've been through a lot in our marriage, and that is kind of key to this story too. So here we go. In fact, our honeymoon was spent 10 years ago going up to Missouri. And we never really had a honeymoon. It was just, we stayed halfway. I think it was in Tennessee, somewhere around Knoxville, on our way up there, and that was it. We moved into a house, a little tiny apartment, and we started going to Bible college. And life really picked up from there. But while we're in Bible college, they have this really crazy thing that they do. And it's probably true with most colleges. With Bible college, it's very significant. And they call it, ring by spring. So everybody comes in, 18, 19 years old, and they're fresh, and they're excited, and they're wanting to follow God. And that's the fall semester. The spring semester comes. Next thing you know, everybody's engaged. Then they get married sometime over the summer. And then 9 months after that, here comes the babies. So, our biology tells us we're male and female, right? Like, we are meant to reproduce. It is a part of who God made us to be. Our biology tells us so. And we were surrounded by a culture that really encouraged that. Everybody's having babies, left and right. It's all over the place. I remember this one girl, they had a really bizarre belief all the way around, but as long as they were fertile, they were going to keep out producing babies, right? So I think they're up to 5 now. And so they were just constantly pregnant all the way through our college years. And I remember getting out one day, and she would always ask me, "Hey, when are you guys going to have a baby? Hey, when are you guys going to have one of these?" She was always, the pressure was there, and we knew it. And it was really, really intense. But I remember, going through a lot of different things and understanding that this was kind of our identity. We had decided that we wanted to figure out who we were in God, who we were in Christ. And then we had this Jesus culture of people that are mothers and fathers, young kids getting married, following Jesus, and reproducing, right? That's the way it's supposed to go. And that really kind of led us towards this idea of trying to, submit to God's design to have children. And I rebelled against that really hardcore. I really did. It was not something I necessarily wanted. I wanted kids, but I wanted to be prepared. I wanted to have a 401k. I wanted to have, $10,000 in the bank. I wanted to store everything up. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect and ready for these kids that we were one day going to have. And so that fear really owned me for a long time. It really did. And I remember one brother, man, he came up to me one day and he said, "Look, what you're doing is you're being disobedient to God. What you are doing is you are rebelling against his design, and you have no faith in him whatsoever. You're never going to be prepared enough to have kids." Those of you out there that have children know there is no way to prepare for having kids. It's just impossible. The best laid plans, forget them. Everything's going to change. So I heard him, though. This is a guy that I could really listen to, and he could really speak a lot of truth in my life. And I wouldn't rebel against it. I'd actually consider his advice. And there's only a few people that I can honestly say that's really like that in my life. But so we kind of started trying to have a baby. We tried the whole natural way, and of course you know what that means. Things were progressing, but nothing was really happening. And so we thought it'd be easy, but it wasn't easy for us. And then it got to the point to where we tried medications to see what was going on, and that really wasn't working either. And eventually we ended up going to the fertility clinic. He was a guy that had like a 95 some odd percentile success rate, like he was doing really good with helping people conceive. Well, we ended up really getting on board with the whole idea. And the more that we started getting involved with the fertility clinic, the more we realized what we had to do. And one of the things, of course, we were overweight. So he's like, well, if you lose weight, that's going to help you conceive. So you need to get on the caveman diet. What's it called? Paleo. Yeah, we tried the paleo diet, which is kind of cool. You eat a lot of meat and veggies, and that's it. So it's eat like a caveman. And we had been doing that for a while, and things were going pretty steady. They were doing really, really good. We were losing weight, and we were starting to feel really healthy and positive about ourselves. Jessica was on, I think, a specific med, Clomid. Thank you. She's over there helping me out, by the way, because I don't remember some of this stuff. So she was on that med, and it's supposed to really help you out with, conception. And for some reason, though, we had been on it maybe 2 or 3 months, but things weren't really happening. And we didn't know exactly what was going on. And all between that time, so there's a period of about 1 year to 6 months to where I totally rebelled against the idea of having a kid, and I slowly started to get on board. And I remember, 1 month, it was like, oh God, oh God, oh God, please, let me be, just let us be single for a little while longer, let us not have a kid. Push it off another month, Lord. I want to enjoy my video games. I want to enjoy being able to stay up late and do what I want to do. I don't necessarily want to have a kid yet. And then the next month would come, and I would be a little bit more sensitive. And okay, Lord, if this is the way that it's supposed to go, then I guess it's not so bad. And the next month it'd be, all right, Lord, it'd be kind of cool to be a father. I think I like that idea. The next month, I'm like, oh Lord, please, oh God, oh God, oh God, is this the month that I find out that I'm a father? And it was about that time that, and all between there too, we had this hope chest thing. And this is my representation of the hope chest, right? Ours was much bigger, but we were starting to store up these gifts and these things that we were going to need for having a baby. Twins kind of runs in my family, so we were kind of hoping for 2 baby boys, In fact, we had already picked out names. They're going to be Judah and Jericho, 2 really strong, biblical names. And man, we prayed over them. We thought about them often. They were real in our heads. We understood who they were. And so we had a hope chest that we kind of stored up all those treasures and all those feelings and thoughts. And again, people didn't really know exactly what we were doing and what we were trying to do. My family knew. And that's really about it. It's just one of those things that you don't really talk about. And that's a shame. But we hid those things. We buried them deep down inside, and we cherished those thoughts and those feelings. And I remember, eventually, once we realized things really weren't working out, we go back to the fertility clinic, and he says, okay, well, we need to do a few certain tests. We did those tests, and then we waited to hear the results of those tests. Now, the beautiful thing, I was in this class called Ezekiel class. It was a higher elective class towards the end of our college career. And it's very intimate. We had Chad Suma, who was the professor, and then 2 other people and me. So it was 4 people all the way around in a really tight, intimate class. So if we stopped and talked about one chapter for 2 weeks, that was fine. We could blaze through the others really quickly without any problem. It was great. I got really close to these people too. And then in the middle of that class, I get a phone call. And that phone call was shattering to me all the way around. Because what I found out was that it was physically impossible for me to reproduce. I had a 0 count. There's no way that's going to happen. So in this instance, 2 negatives do not make a positive. It's just terrible. And so God literally took my identity, smashed it to bits. Everything that I thought I was supposed to be was gone.
I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. I will have mercy on whom I have mercy.
It was really brutal for me. I remember feeling this worse pit in my stomach. I mean, it was just insane. My professor let me answer that phone call, and I heard those words, and I told them, and they prayed for me right then and there, but I was in shell shock. I couldn't believe everything I had built myself up to be. Every hope and dream that I wanted was utterly and completely smashed to bits. And behind that, you can't go through the Old Testament without understanding God's sovereignty. God is sovereign. God rules over all things. You can't get beyond that. And so all I could hear in my head was, I will have compassion on whom I have compassion and mercy on whom I have mercy. But it didn't feel that way at that time. Now it was, believe it or not. That was compassion, that was mercy. What he did was compassionate. But it didn't feel that way to begin with. So, from there, I started having these really tough feelings of inadequacy, of, feelings that I wasn't enough. And actually, 1 Samuel 1:8 comes to mind, and I think Tracy's going to read that for us.
And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?
So, and again, my wife longed to have children, right? Like, you read through the Old Testament, you know that it is shameful for a woman who can't conceive. That truth continues to this day. If you have a problem with that, women out there, if you've ever had a problem conceiving, it is shameful to feel that way and then see how easy it is for everybody else just to have babies. And, for me, I want my wife to desire me. I want it to be a place in her heart, but she coveted having a kid more than me. That's the honest truth of it. And so, when I hear Elkanah, when he says those words, I hear him, I understand what he's saying. And that's the father of, Samuel, right? The prophet. The last of the judges, the first of the prophets. And she had an issue with conceiving. She dedicated the child to the Lord, right? And that's kind of how all that kind of came about. But, his story in the background was this feeling of inadequacy. I am not worth enough. If you don't ever have kids, am I not worth 10 sons to you? No. No, that's not it. It's a lot of pain, a lot of shame, and a lot of inadequacy that goes with that. So, what made this whole scenario even worse for me is, I went to school to become a therapist. I wanted to be a counselor. I have a degree in Christian counseling. The problem with all that, though, is you have to go through a lot of therapy yourself in class to get there. So I show up for this stupid class, buy a stupid book with a stupid author, and they called the book Shattered Dreams, right? When God's dreams are bigger and better than yours, and what it looks like when he shatters yours to achieve his dreams. It was very painful to have to go to that class. I hated it. I didn't want to read the book. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to participate in class. God in his sovereignty, though, had other plans. And so I had to go through that. And it was terrible and awesome. Helped me and Jess out tremendously. But even then, I'm in my counseling internship too, and I'm therapizing people, every Tuesday and Wednesday. And part of that, I've got to go and I've got to get supervision, which is pretty much a therapy session for a counselor. It's what it really looks like. And so I'm sitting there with Professor Walden, who's like 85, 90 years today. And he saw the rise of all the weird, crazy stuff back in the day as far as therapy goes, the Freudian stuff, Gestalt therapy, everything that's kind of nuts. Thomas back there can probably attest to some of these things. But, all the way around, he was old and leathery, and he could say whatever he wanted to do. He was an elder of the church. He was a titan of the faith, and a very devout man. But, he looked at me, and, we're sitting there, and of course I'm honest with him. I tell him my thoughts, my feelings, and everything I'm going through, and he asked me a very pointed question. It was intense, very, very intense. Again, one of those people that anybody else would have said it, I probably would have broke their nose. He says it, though, and I hear him, right? And so he says, Cody, let me ask you something. I said, yes, sir. He says, do you have any murderers in your family? Thieves, rapists? Do you have any people with mental illness or disorders? I said, yeah, probably. Definitely with a mental illness, right? Well, I said, yes, sir. I do. And he said, so what makes your blood so special that you have to pass on all those traits to someone else? That's pretty painful for somebody like me that just had my hopes and dreams and my identity destroyed, right? Like he just told me what you wanted was dumb anyways. It was stupid to want those things. But then he followed it right in with something else that was really powerful, and he started talking to me about this idea of being adopted into Yahweh's family, into God's family, and how God has adopted me as a son, even though I didn't deserve it. And how now I have the chance to enact on earth practically what God has done for me spiritually. It was really, really powerful for me to hear that. And again, like that immediately took me from a moment of despair to hope. And that hope was very, very powerful to me. It really was. And Chris, if you could read Romans 8, that bit for me real quick. And it's just like Galatians, but it's going to hit on something very, very significant that I want us to hear.
For you have not received the spirit of slavery leading to fear again, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by which we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, heirs also, heirs of God, and fellow heirs of Christ. If indeed we suffer with him, so that we may be also be glorified with him.
In Bridge 42, I want you to hear something very significant there, okay? He says, the Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, heirs also, heirs of God, and fellow heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. You see, whatever Jesus is in the kingdom of heaven, we are too. It is not as though we have a bio kid, Jesus, and then we, the adopted kids, the foster kids, whatever, coming in. And there's a difference between the two. No, God says, everything my son is, you are also to me as well. And that should be very significant for us. Because your identity, though it used to be in bondage to slavery, just like me, every one of you at some point was in slavery to sin. You are no longer a slave to sin, right? But you are free in Christ. But because you're adopted into God's family, you have his spirit that's going to last forever and ever and ever, right? Your identity is now different. My identity is shaped through adoption. It is shaped through this whole concept of God redeeming and replacing my shattered dreams with what he wanted for me. And let's be honest, I was a prepper, right? So if I had had a biological child of my own, never, ever, ever would I ever had adopted. It would have been too much. Having my own kid, I'd have been way too protective and zealous for, right? And God knew that. God knew that if I had a biological child, I wouldn't adopt. And so I had to adopt. That was what God wanted for us. So that kind of brings me back to this concept of Abraham again, right? And Adam Scott is going to be awesome and gracious and kind of recap Genesis 22 for us. And then I'm going to tell you the point. The major point that I really took away that made me look forward to adoption.
So the story is familiar. God calls Abraham out of his country and he says, I'm going to give you a son. Abraham gets older and older and older. As he gets older, his wife gets older. Abraham's 100. Sarah is 90. God gives him a son. And then in Genesis 22, God says, Abraham. And Abraham says, here I am. And he says, I want you to take the son that I promised you, Isaac, that is here now. And I want you to bring him to Mount Moriah, and I want you to kill him. And so Abraham doesn't say a word. We get no information about Abraham's thought process, but what Abraham does is he believes and he obeys. So he takes a son, he takes two men, he takes wood, puts it on Isaac's shoulders. They walk 3 days until he would see the place from afar. where he's going to make the altar. And he tells the two men to stay back with the divisions of their animals. And he says, Isaac, you're going to come with me and we go up to that mountain. And so Isaac does it. And his son Isaac says, Father, we have the fire and we have the wood, but we don't have the sacrifice. We don't have the animal. And Abraham says, the Lord will provide the lamb. And so they go up. And this whole time, again, we don't know what Abraham's thinking. And Abraham actually doesn't say anything in the chapter except when God calls him, he says, here I am. When Isaac asks him, Father, he says, here I am. And then he says, God will provide. So he builds the altar, and he binds his only son, the son of promise, and he puts him on the altar, and he lifts the knife to kill his only son, and just before he does, again, God says, Abraham, Abraham. Again, Abraham says, here I am. He says, turn around. He looks behind him, and there's a ram caught by his horns in the thicket. And Abraham, I'm sure, breathes a sigh of relief and unties his son and offers the ram in place of his son. And the angel of the Lord comes to him and says, now I know that you fear God. Because you've done this, I'm just going to reiterate the promise of God that you are going to be a great nation and that the world, that the whole earth is going to be blessed through you. And so Abraham then decided to name that place, the Lord will provide.
Beautiful, thank you. So, what is really significant about that whole story is, the reason that we can come to faith in God is because we are the continuity of the Jewish nation, really. Through faith, we are sons of God and heirs to the promise, that God is going to be our God and we're going to be his people. And the thing is, this was Abraham's big test. And it was way back, I think, Genesis 15, where God calls Abraham righteous because of his faith. So this wasn't the time where Abraham became righteous. This is way after. In fact, Genesis 22 says, and God tested Abraham. This was his test. This was for Abraham to know how far he is willing to go to serve the Almighty God. Now, not to steal Jason's thunder for the Genesis stuff, but from Genesis chapter 1 to Rev 22, we hear about God's faithfulness. If God says he is going to do something, he is going to do it. My favorite lines in the book of Ezekiel, he gets all the way through there and he says, now I'm going to kill you all. I'm going to destroy everything. You guys are unfaithful. It's going to happen. And they say, but Lord, you're always going to leave a remnant, right? Surely there's some. And he says, nope, you're all going to die. I'm going to kill you all. And they keep saying, but no, I think if you repent, he says, no, it's too late for that. You're all going to die. And eventually gets to a point to where there's this a really brutal chapter where God just hammers it out and says, yes, this is the way it's going to happen. For my name's sake, so help me, you are all going to perish. And then they get it. Right? They say, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the end. There is no hope. Total despair comes over them. Then the next chapter he says, but I will save you. But I will leave a remnant. But I will, for my name's sake, not for you, but for my name's sake, I'm not going to kill everybody. I'm not going to punish everybody. But God is constant in the fact that if he says he's going to do it, he is going to do it. He is that faithful. So Abraham, right, he goes and he hears God, or he experiences God's faithfulness all the way through Genesis, and then he gets to a point where God says, man, come out here and look up at the stars. Because of all the things that you've done and because of your faithfulness, this is what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to give you a son, and I'm going to give you as many stars as there are in the skies. And one of your descendants is going to bless the whole world. One of them is going to be the Savior, the Messiah, that's going to fix all of this bad stuff. Man, Abraham gets really jazzed about that idea, right? Like he gets super stoked about it, and he says, man, that's great. And so he really takes that identity, the father of many nations, and he clings to it. And then in Genesis 22, God seemingly, it looks as though to me, if I'm just reading it looks like God's going back on his word, right? I told you I was going to give you a son through Isaac, or, I'm going to give you many descendants through Isaac. And now God's saying, now I want you to go sacrifice Isaac to me, right? That's a big incongruency in my head. Probably at that point in time, I'd say, well, you're obviously not the creator of the universe, so I'm going to back out now. Abraham didn't do that. What Abraham did was he reckoned it in his head exactly what God was going to do. He believed that God was so faithful that, first of all, he had to obey. Yes, he's going to have to sacrifice Isaac. And also, God is still going to give him descendants through Isaac. So how did he come about with that idea? And I believe Rebecca, Hebrews 11.
By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did not receive him back.
Abraham has to obey God. God said sacrifice. God's promise is still going to come true, therefore God must raise Isaac back from the dead. That's how faithful Abraham was in this whole thing. Like his dream never really got shattered. It seemed to be shattered at the time, but at the same moment, he knows that God is faithful, that he's going to do those things. So for me, I had to come to a realization that if God was going to shatter my dream of being a biological father, and it was everything, right? It meant the world to become a father to me at that point in time. It was something that I didn't originally want, and then God pressed it upon me. I was meant to be a father. Then I get that phone call, and it all goes away. And so what am I supposed to do with that? And so here, then I started thinking about this whole story, about Abraham and about Isaac and the sacrifice and how God just pushed right through. And his faithfulness was known. And man, I had to think that whatever God's dream for me must be bigger and better. It must be more special, more important, more beautiful in every way. So no matter what I thought being a biological father was, the hope of adoption must be that much better, right? If God's going to destroy something that was beautiful and natural for me, then being an adoptive father is just that much more intense. And so I started getting really excited. I was like, man, I thought it was everything. If that's nothing to me now, then adoption must be everything. It must be the thing to seek after. At that point, I think, and I can't really remember, like I said, that whole week, it felt like one day to me. And it felt like an eternity. It really did. But I remember that night or a few days later, somewhere, Professor Walton had talked to me, started getting excited about it. And he also told us this one thing. And I know there's a lot of people that have suffered in ways that I can't even imagine, but he helped me rationalize exactly what I was feeling. And because we had stored up items, we had picked out names, we had prayed over these kids that will never be here, we're never going to meet them. It was in many instances like a miscarriage. And he helped us grieve over that. They're kids that we're never going to meet. Their families, they're never going to know their families, and we're never going to have the opportunity to bless them like we thought we were going to. And so at that point in time, I remember coming home and just allowing ourselves just to boo-hoo big time. I think we ordered some pizzas, and I think I ate a whole pizza myself. I said, forget the whole stupid dieting thing, man. I'm just going to stuff my face with tear-soaked pizza, And that's how I felt. And I think Jess did the same thing. And we boo-hooed for a long time. And honestly, we still kind of boo-hoo about it too. Those pain, or that kind of pain, that scarring, doesn't just magically disappear. It still exists. And it's probably always going to be somewhat of a crutch to us. So don't be upset when you invite us to a baby shower and we say, hey, we got to pass. Baby showers are sensitive for us. They're painful. It's a reminder of the gift that you got that we didn't. And it hurts. Now, we want to be joyful with you. And in a lot of ways, we are. In a lot of ways, we can still rejoice with you. But man, I tell you what, 2 months after that, when we got invited to a baby shower, that was not a pretty day. That was a bad day. It was just salt in the wounds. So, for us, we really started looking towards adoption. And I remember at some point we got the bug. We moved away from Missouri and we went to Knoxville. I got involved with the homeless ministry there, but we were kind of listless at the same time. We started feeling this plug for God or God gave us this tug to come back home. We felt like we really need to be around our family. We need to be back here. That's where our mission was supposed to be. And I think we were scoping out jobs on the internet, looking for different stuff, and we saw a group home job that came up there. We said, oh man, that'd be kind of cool. It'd be really neat if, while we're trying to adopt, we can already have kids in our home. Man, that sounds like a dream, And we turned towards that, and I think my father, actually, we were talking to him about it, and he said, have you guys thought about South Mountain? Have you guys thought about, being foster parents there? And I was like, no, but we will now. And so, we called and we talked to some people there, and within a week we had an interview, went out for the interview, and they took us. So all of a sudden, I was about to be a father. Foster father, adopted father, doesn't matter. I was about to be a dad. And then they told us we're going to have 3 little girls to begin with. And that was very exciting. Super, super exciting. I remember talking to Dad and telling Dad that we were going to be foster parents there. And he's like, why on earth would you want to work there? That doesn't make any sense. Now, Dad grew up at a time at South Mountain. He remembers being there often. In fact, it was very emotional for Dad to come over and eat corn over at our house for a long time because all they grew was corn. They had corn for every meal at some point. He was sick of corn. When he left South Mountain, he promised, I'm never going to come back here and eat corn. And yet there you were. It was actually at South Mountain that I met Adam and Tracy, and they're the ones that got us here. So it's kind of an interesting circle. It's also an interesting circle for my father that this really nasty dude that was there told him one day that he was going to have his kids at South Mountain, because Dad was just going to be that crappy of a father. And I remember Dad saying, man, I wish I could find that guy now because yes, my son is at South Mountain, but he's not there because I failed. He's there because I succeeded. And that was significant. It was very beautiful because everything kind of came right back around. Well, while we're there, Jessica and I, again, our hearts are towards adoption and we're starting to think about this. We went from 0 to 5 kids in a day. And so for me, man, I blessed God and I said, this might as well be as many stars as there are in the skies. I felt just like old man Abe. I was like, gosh, this is great. We've had lots of kids throughout our history of being foster parents. We've had lots of children. And eventually, not eventually, it was actually the first kid that we saw, and that's the thing. We promised ourselves that we weren't going to adopt the first kids that walked through our door. And one of the foster parents, we weren't even really on the clock yet. We had just barely got moved in. And our neighbor called and she said, oh, man, I got a kid getting off the bus. I'm going to be about 2 or 3 minutes late. If she can just crash at your house for just a couple of minutes, I'll be there to pick her up. And sure enough, this little girl came bouncing in there with these cute little freckles and wild curly red hair. And she looked at this table that we had. That is very unique. Only my family has a table like this. It's made of seashells, very textured on top. She feels it and says, wow, man, I've always wanted a table like this. I said, no, you haven't, kid, but that's okay. We loved her for it. We really did. And we were there for a couple of years. And in that time, we fell in love with this little girl. Found out she had a brother. And then found out they were also up for adoption. And then God gave us 2 very special possessions, 2 of our own children to have. 2 things we cherish like crazy, and we probably should cherish just a little bit more. But at the end of the day, that's how God blessed us. And we became adoptive parents, and we can share in this, the heart of God, Like God is an adoptive father to all of you. And really, when you adopt a kid, you have something very special that you can relate to with the father. And it is unbelievably powerful. It really is. And I can't really describe exactly what it feels like because there's love, joy, there's peace, tons of patience that goes into it, fear and loathing, praying with ashes and sackcloth. I mean, there's so much that goes with it. It's just absolutely incredible. Beautiful, awful, and awesome all at once. God really took our dream and shattered it to bits and then replaced it with something better. And he had to do that so that we would realize his dreams for us. And Jessica and I became on board with that. We got behind what God wanted for us, and our identity shifted. If it was my will, I would have went off and I would have continued to become a licensed therapist and a counselor and all that kind of good stuff and making way more money than I'm making right now, which is peanuts. But somehow God led us, and I became a social worker, which after working in foster care, you kind of feel like, well, the saying is, the devil's secret service. That's DSS, right? And so I kind of work for them. And what's really goofy about that whole idea, though, is like, man, it was us against them, and now I am them. I'm a part of the government, and that's a whole other story. But even then, a position came open there, and I felt led to go for it, too, and I became an adoption social worker. And so I've come full circle all the way around. In fact, I mean, there's still some cases that I have that I see the name of the adoption social worker that I work for. But now, not only do I actively participate in my own adoption with my kids, and I continue the spiritual reality practically on earth, what God has done for me, but I also get to help other people do that too. You know, it's really beautiful as I've got Jim and Amanda here, not to put you guys on spot or anything, but man, we're on this awesome, crazy, horrible, terrible, great roller coaster together where they're participating and actively pursuing to adopt 2 girls, and they live in your home, and you guys know where I'm coming from. And many of you out there probably do as well. And this right here really brings me back to the new identity that God blessed me with. And Patty, I think you're going to share James 1:27. And both of these 2 verses that I'm going to share are super significant to me because they tell me who I am now. This is what God has made me into.
Pure is genuine religion in the sight of God and Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you.
To piggyback on that, we have Isaiah 1:16 and 18. It says, "Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, and remove the evil of your deeds before my sight. Cease to do evil and learn to do good. Seek justice, reprove the ruthless, defend the orphan, and plead for the widow." Now, the things that are really significant, Isaiah 1:16, I've got tattooed on me. And the funny thing is that happened before any of this happened. It was back in college before we ever got this story going, you know. And here it is on my flesh, literally ingrained in me. And it is what I have become all the way around. And so my job is quite literally to defend the orphan and plead for the widow, to visit orphans and widows in their distress. That is who I am. It is my occupation. It is my life. It is what I do. And God has shaped me to be that very person. And all the sorrow is worth it. All the pain was worth it. It was beautiful and it was great, horrible and awesome all at once. And so I'm going to do a shameless plug for my job here too, because I'm an adoptions worker and I've got kids that need homes. And so when you guys came in, I hope that most of you were able to get a gift bag from DSS, some Burke County. It's got a little knickknacks in there. Most importantly, it's got a telephone number that you need to call if you feel like, well, no, you see, I don't really want to say if you feel led, because you are led. The truth is, those are commands. Those are a bit of the identity that you're supposed to have as Christians. And with that, if you want to follow in this participation to visit orphans and widows in their distress, give me a call. Talk to Jim and Amanda. Talk to Adam and Tracy Scott about what it means to participate at some level in the foster care system or to be an adoptive parent. I mean, all the way down from just, praying over a foster family to being a foster parent to adopting. You can get plugged in some way through all of that.